Hi, everyone, and thank you for checking out the Dancing Eyes Podcast, Episode 9. My name's Frankie Caputo, and this is a podcast where I talk to people with nystagmus about life for a while. We talk about some of the ups, the downs, the good things, the bad things, and everything in the middle. Today, my guest is John Paul. John Paul works as an audio engineer, and he also has a degree in philosophy. In this episode, we talk a lot about his passion for audio engineering, and we also discuss some philosophical topics as well. I really love this episode, and this is definitely a special one to me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you're watching this video on YouTube, make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and also leave me a comment and let me know what you think. And if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button. I also just wanted to mention that all of the episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, so if you'd rather just listen to it instead of watching it, you can also just pull up Dancing Eyes Podcast on there as well, and you'll find it. Lastly, new episodes will be out on the first and third Monday of every month, so make sure to keep your eyes out for those. And with all that being said, let's get on with the show. What's up, John Paul? How you doing?
Good, Frankie. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to tell my story here and to hopefully give some cause for hope to parents who might be, a little bit down about their kids being diagnosed with nystagmus, or people who have nystagmus, maybe needing a little bit of reassurance or encouragement that um, this is not the end of the world. This is, just one more challenge to overcome, and overcome it you can.
And you've got a lot of stuff too. You've overcome a lot of challenges, and we're going to get into it later, but you also do some things that I think a lot of people would be pretty surprised that somebody with nystagmus does. So
That's for sure. Yeah. I'm happy to get into it. I guess probably the best place to start is at the beginning.
let's do it.
So I was, I guess the first time my parents noticed something was wrong with my eyes was when I was an infant. Um, the pediatrician, when I was in for a routine checkup, noticed that my eyes were kind of swinging back and forth, and he said to my mom, Do his eyes always do that?" And she said, "Yeah." And she thought it was normal. That it was just a baby. I'm the oldest of four kids, four boys, and my mom really didn't have any idea that was not normal. So we went to an eye doctor, and that started the whole process where eventually I was diagnosed with congenital nystagmus. And among other things, I'm also nearsighted, and I have a pretty severe light sensitivity. So I can't go from really dark places to really light places without needing some time for adjustment. And I need to wear sunglasses outside all the time. Otherwise, I'll burn my retinas because they have no pigment. I have ocular albinism, is what it's called, in addition to the nystagmus. And so in the course of getting this diagnosis, and we saw a couple of doctors through that process, there were some things that they ended up telling us that I wouldn't be able to do. They said, I'd never ride a bike. I'd never learn to read. I would never play baseball. I'd never go to college. I would never drive a car. I'm happy to say that 25 years later, after finding out all of these things, I learned to read pretty well, and a lot sooner than a lot of the kids my age when I was in school.
Some
Um,
of those things are just so drastic.
they
The
are.
reading thing, the college thing, really.
Yeah, they really are. Because I sit here now. Was literally sitting in my office at the very college where I work now that I graduated from 5 years ago, which is a great part of my story too, and I can tell that a little bit later on. Um, I ride a bike to work every day. Um, I played Little League Baseball for a couple of years. And that's another part of the story that we'll get to in a little bit. There's a reason why it was only for a couple of years and not, any longer than that. Um, there's, all kinds of stuff. I've traveled internationally. I've worked with some pretty well-known musicians as a result of my career being an audio engineer in the place where I work.
So when your parents hear your doctor say something like this, do you continue going to this doctor, or do you go see somebody else?
You know, I'm not totally clear on exactly when we stopped seeing that particular doctor and went somewhere else. I know that they went through a couple of different eye doctors at that time, um, and it wasn't until we came across, and I think at the time he was in Philadelphia, where I grew up. Um, we came across Dr. Richard Hertle, and a lot of people in the nystagmus community will know who he is. He's probably one of the top 3 researchers in the world when it comes to nystagmus. And I know my parents and I are incredibly fortunate to have crossed paths with him, because he gave us a lot of reason for hope, as a young child, and and as young parents for them. He said, there's no cause for alarm. It might make some of those things more challenging for him, but just because he has nystagmus doesn't mean he won't be able to do those things. He said I could be, very much a normal child, engage in normal childhood activities. It really wouldn't have all that dramatic an effect on most things. It might make school a little bit more difficult, he said, but it wouldn't make it impossible. And
This is a huge difference from that
yeah,
last
it
doctor.
was incredible. I mean, he really changed the entire outlook just by being a hopeful voice. And he's, as a researcher, he said that there was always new things on the horizon that could help me, live, an even more normal life than I already would. I mean, we followed him around for years, to all different places where he would go, following grant money for research. He went to the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. We went to different conferences where he was presenting. And then about 12, 13 years ago or thereabouts, we caught up with him in Pittsburgh, where he was at the University of Pittsburgh Children's Medical Center. And figure I'm a early teens at that point in time. And he's checking me out. He's, catching up on my case, because he's kind of kept, we've not seeing him. I see my normal eye doctor that the rest of my family went to. And he obviously knew about all the issues, and he was able to kind of work around some of those things with making sure I had a good prescription for eyeglasses, since I need them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But he's getting caught up on my case, and he's looking, and he's seeing, based on, my old files from, years, prior. And he says, well, I had a head turn, and a pretty significant one at that point in time. And he said it had gotten worse, since, from when he had seen me previously. And he said, look, this is one of the things that you do have to deal with nystagmus, is that your head turn for where your null, to where your null point is, it can change. It can, and it can get worse over time if it's in this one spot. And my head was kind of tilted off, looking, so my face was looking, towards the left side of my body. My eyes would be, centered.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, if you don't do something now to correct the head tilt, you're going to end up having arthritis in your neck by the time you're 20. And that was something that, me at that time, I didn't really understand what was going on. I'm, early teens, still very much naive to the whole thing, the whole situation. Didn't really understand what nystagmus was.
Yeah.
I had a hard time explaining it to people.
I don't know about you, but when I was in my early teens, I didn't even know that I had a head tilt. I only saw it in pictures.
I had seen it in pictures too, and I had people who would point it out. I don't know if you had the same
Yep.
experience,
Mm.
which sometimes kids could be a little rude about it.
Yeah.
It's like, look, that's me. That's who I am. My head, I have to do that in order to see the camera. Sorry.
Yeah, some people just don't understand it. But if you
Exactly.
explain it to them, they'll understand it. But especially when you're an early teenager, like you don't even really know what's going on.
Right.
So it's hard to
Right.
explain
And neither
those
does
things.
anybody else. And so it's kind of this whole compounding problem of, how do I explain this to people? Uh, that this is part of who I am. This is how I have to interact with the world, and I can't do anything about it. Um,
It's definitely different because there's a lot of things out there that people will see more often. So they don't really have to be explained, but this is one of those things that you hear that 1 in 1,000 statistic, and
Absolutely.
I don't believe that. But anyway, so Dr. Hurdle is telling you by the time you're
Um,
20, you might get arthritis in your neck because of this
yes,
your head tilt.
exactly. So, um, he's telling us this. So my parents talk, and they got, at this point they're in charge of my medical care because I'm a minor. And so they're discussing this, and they figured, okay, you know what, we got to do this because it's kind of this is important. We want to make sure that we anything that we can do now to make sure that he has a whole fruitful life without you know undue pain and suffering. We want to do that. So a few months after that particular conversation with Dr. Hertle, I went in. We went back to Pittsburgh, and uh, I went in for the what's known as the Kestenbaum procedure. Essentially, what it is they reposition the eyes within the eye sockets by moving some of the muscle tissue uh, around. They'll make incisions and cut out a certain part of muscle tissue essentially, and then add some to the other side to basically correct the entire tilt. So my head went from being probably 10 to 15 degrees off center to the left to about, they brought it actually 5 degrees right, so that by the time I had completely healed from the surgery, I'd be essentially dead center, which is, I think,
Oh, so they
where I
took
am
the
now.
fact they took the idea that your head would continue turning after the procedure into consideration.
They did, but part of that was the healing process. So the muscles would kind of settle into place as the stitches dissolved and then the muscles healed. Um, and so this is another thing that's really cool. My parents had explained to me what the procedure was, but the way they explained it was not actually how it took place. It was actually a lot simpler because surgical technology had advanced so far by that point in time, and I have no idea now where it is. It could have advanced even further. Who knows? Um, but the way that it was described to me that they'd have to do it was actually not the way that it ended up taking place, um, which ended up being really good because it meant a lot less time healing wise, and no visible scarring on my face, which I know they would minimize anyway, but you'd still probably have some scarring from, I think, the older version of the procedure.
Huh. Okay.
Um,
So how long was the
essentially,
healing process?
so I had stitches for about a week, and they were the self-dissolving kind.
Mm.
So as time went, like, it was really difficult for the first couple of days to open my eyes, um, because it hurt. My eyelids were rubbing over these stitches, and it was very uncomfortable. Kind of like having something in your eye, but you can't get it out because it's supposed to be there.
Oh yeah.
So I had those for about a week. By about week's end or so, they had dissolved. But there was still a little bit more time. About a month, I think, was what they had said in terms of taking extra care, not rubbing your eyes, doing anything, super intense, with your eyes or whatever. No crazy um, sports or anything like that. Just be very gentle and, you know,
Well, you barely have a null
patient.
point at all right now, from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, so that's the great thing is, we're well over a decade removed from this procedure now, and I've had very, uh, no null point to speak of, like you said, like you
Yeah, I
said.
don't see any null point.
People still say that, from time to time, like they'll comment on my eyes. They'll notice them swinging back and forth. It gets really bad when I'm tired, which I'm sure you've noticed as well.
Hmm.
Um, but for the most part, people don't comment on it anymore, which is, I guess, a testament to the fact that most people don't really feel the need to comment on something that's different about you after a certain point, like they reach this level of maturity. Um,
I think some
where,
people just also stop caring about other
yeah,
people so much. Like, man, I've got so much stuff I got to worry about for myself. I don't really care about this dude's eyes.
exactly. It's kind of, let me worry about the plank in my own eye instead of the speck in this other guy's eye. For anyone who's familiar with scripture, um,
No, that went over my head.
they'll get that reference. That's um, basically, the idea is worry about yourself first because you got your own issues, and then, if you have time later, you
Yeah.
can point out someone else's to them if they haven't seen them already.
So I am
So,
curious what you do about this. So let's say you're meeting somebody for the first time, or maybe not for the first time, but you're just getting to know somebody, but your eyes start going crazy. I know for me, sometimes I'll be talking to somebody and they don't necessarily know about my eye condition. And sometimes just out of nowhere, they'll start freaking out, just going sporadic. And I feel like I have to address them just because I feel like it creates an elephant in the room and I have to alleviate it. So does something like that ever happen to you?
not that I've noticed. I've typically been pretty good about, uh, not putting myself in social situations where I will have issues. Sometimes it happens though, where I'll be out late, I'll be tired or whatever, and my eyes kind of go crazy, and that's usually when I kind of get, you know, hey, listen, I gotta get going here. I'm tired. My eyes are going bananas right now. Um, and most people are typically pretty understanding on that front. Um, if someone says something straight up, like, hey, I noticed your eyes are moving. Like, what's that about?
Hmm.
I'll kind of explain, I've gotten pretty good at it. Oh, I have this, congenital defect. It's called nystagmus. Basically means that my eyes move involuntarily, and I can't really control it. And it could be, you know, barely noticeable, or it could be right up in your face, depending on the situation. That's just the way that it is.
I have the
And
urge to
that's
tell people
usually
that I'm not high. It seems to be their go-to, that I'm high or I'm wasted or something.
um
You ever get
yeah,
that?
I think every once in a while people have asked me, if I've been drinking or anything, and I'll say no, that's just my eyes just do that.
Yeah.
And that's usually enough. I don't usually get the, are you high? But that's mostly because the community that I'm in, we're um pretty well drug free for the most part. I mean, you'll see it here and there, but by and large, drugs are really not a part of um, community life where I live,
I hear you.
which I'm very fortunate in that regard. I think drugs are really, as a side note, I think anyone who struggles with drug addiction, I think that's, um, a really terrible problem to have. And for the people who are trying desperately to get out of that, I think that's really awesome. Um, you know, uh, as a musician and as someone who enjoys listening to music, um, one of my favorite songs of all time is "Master of Puppets" by Metallica,
That's a good one.
which is all about drug addiction and how
Really?
it. Yeah, it is. It's
I have
straight
to
up.
listen to the words more.
But essentially, the drug is the master, and the person who uses drugs is the puppet, and the
Oh,
drug has strings, it basically makes the person want to do drugs.
I
Um,
had no idea that's what the song was about.
yeah, well, if you listen, there's a line in there. It's chop your breakfast on a mirror, which is essentially a reference to doing lines of cocaine.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh,
Um,
I'm gonna hear that song differently now.
yeah. Well,
I mean,
that's
it
the
makes
thing.
total sense when you tell me that. It makes total sense because I hear the lyrics in my head. I'm like, yeah, well, I get it. But
Yeah. It's mind
hmm.
blowing when you figure things out like that. And a lot of their music is about struggling with addiction, wounds from childhood, things of that nature, things that are very deeply personal to um, the lead singer, James Hetfield.
James Hetfield. Yep.
And a lot of their music really resonates with me because there's a lot of things that I deal with on a daily basis, both because of the nystagmus and because of other things that I have within my life that are completely separate from nystagmus. Um, that you know the music helps me kind of cope with a little bit, and um, gives me a little bit of strength to um, you know keep going when it's a little bit challenging.
Let's talk about some
Um,
music then.
yeah,
I didn't know you were
absolutely.
into. I didn't know that you played instruments. What do you play?
Well, when I say I'm a musician, um,
I guess you
people
don't have to play an instrument to be a
not
musician.
necessarily, but in my case, my instrument is actually the musicians on stage, um, being controlled through a mixing console, and put out into the house PA system, the speakers, so the people who are attending the concert can hear them. Most people don't think of a group of musicians, whether they're actors on a stage or in a musical, for instance, or people playing guitar and drums and bass and singing as a musical instrument in and of itself, but in a way that it is, because the idea is to blend those people together in a way that sounds harmonious. And so that's been a lot of my study, my passion over the last 8-9 years or so, has been learning how to do that really well. And that's why I've gone down the path of becoming an audio engineer, um, because I want to work with musicians. I enjoy it. I think it's an incredible gift, to work with people uh, whose sole purpose in life is to create music for other people to enjoy. And if my role with the band is to make sure that they get heard in the best possible way by the people who come out to hear them, then
Very
that's just
important
as
job, by the way. Very
it's
important.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say it's just as important as the people who are up there on the stage
Hmm.
actually playing the music, because there's a saying in theater. Uh, an actor without techies is just a mime emoting in the dark. Um, but
That's a good one.
it is, and essentially, it's saying, if you don't have people who run the sound, run the lights, make sure that if there's video involved, that the video works properly, and all of those factors that go into putting on a really good production. Um, keep kicking my pop filter out of the way here. Um, then no one's going to see anything. No one's going to hear anything. There's nothing to enjoy. So
There's nothing more frustrating going to a play or going to watch a band play, and the members playing are great, but it's not mixed properly, and
yeah,
you can't hear the singer because the drums are too loud, or you
sure.
can't hear the bass. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally get that. And
I feel like you would have some pressure on you though
absolutely,
to
yes,
deliver.
100%.
Yeah.
It is without a doubt one of the most high pressure things, especially when you've got someone there who's looking over your shoulder, trying to tell you how to do your job, telling you straight up like, oh, I can't hear this or that or the other thing. Like, well, I'm sorry, I'm doing the best I can here. Um, the smart ass in me would love to say, if you think you can do a better job, here you go, step right in, have at it. But I
I'm curious how your eyes react to the pressure. When I'm under pressure, if I'm anxious, my eyes will start freaking out, and you have to deliver in front
that's the
of
great thing about
crowds.
that's the yeah. And you're right that my eyes do go a little bit haywire when the pressure's on, which is why I try to take a lot of that away by getting ahead of it early, doing sound checks and stuff like that, so that um, when it comes time for the actual show, it can run pretty smoothly.
Mhm.
And I don't have to I'm not under the gun trying to get stuff, fixed because it's not working right. Had to do that before, not fun. Um,
I
but the
bet.
great, the nice thing about sound is that you don't need your eyes. Um, as long as you know where, and I lay out my mixing console the same way every time. So if anyone's ever seen what a mixing console looks like, it's got a big bunch of
Knobs.
knobs and faders and everything, all kinds of stuff on it. It looks like a spaceship. It looks like something straight out of Star Wars, if
Star
I'm being
Trek.
completely
Yeah.
honest. It is one of the most daunting things to look at if you have no idea what you're doing. But when you've had enough time and practice on one of these things, on a mixing console, it becomes second nature. And one of the things that I try to do for myself is I try to lay it out the same way every time. So I've got 9 or 10 faders that I set up just for drums. And then the next one is always bass. And then I've got, if I've got a piano on the stage, I've got piano right after bass. And then I've got my guitars and, any other instruments that I have to fit in there, whether there's, someone who's bringing, say, a saxophone, or they've got violins, or a mandolin, um, things of that nature. I'll fit those in right after I get guitars. Um, and those will be my acoustic plugins and my electric guitars with microphones on amplifiers. And then the last thing in my chain is always vocals. And I always lay it out the same way so that when it comes time to actually run the show, I know where everything is pretty much by feel.
Yeah, you don't even have to see it at that point if
I
it
don't
stays
really have to
consistent.
see it
Yeah.
exactly. And then because I work on the same board all the time when I'm doing music, um, I know where controls are for various parameters, like and a lot of these things are going to sound very technical, but things like high pass filters and gates, compressors, limiters, equalizers, all that stuff, like I know where all those knobs and controls are. So I don't really need to be looking with my eyes for stuff. I'm generally looking by feel, for the most part, to make my adjustments when the time is, when time calls for it, basically. Um,
And I
and
think
I'm not
that concept of kind of knowing where things are because they're staying consistent is something that helps out in a lot of aspects of life, not just that.
absolutely, absolutely. So that was something that my parents found out when I was a toddler. I was about 3 years old, and we had just moved um, to a new house, and they had just put carpets. It had been a hardwood floor before, and they had put carpets down in the living room and the dining room. But there was a gap, probably about 16, 18 inches wide between the two rooms where there was no carpet. It was down onto the hardwood. And at the time, there was a pad and a carpet, and it was probably about 2 inches of change in depth between the carpeted surface and the hardwood floor. Um, and I was, toddling from the dining room into the living room, and my foot caught on the carpet, and I went flying into a chair. And I have a cut, or a scar now from getting a cut on my eye. You probably can't see it on this one,
Nah,
It's somewhere in here.
I believe you.
Um, from smacking my head into a chair, because I didn't account for the change in the height of the floor in the map of my house that I kept in my head. I'm 3 years old at
Ah,
this point in time, and I have mapped out my house in my head so I can navigate.
how cool is that that our brains are capable of doing that even at 3 years old?
It's incredible, and I still do it to this day. Like I'll walk around my house in the middle of the night in the dark and not have a problem because I know how many steps it is from the top to the bottom and vice versa. Um, I know exactly where the couch and the dining room table are downstairs, and I know the this. I live in a pretty small apartment, but it's a 2-story like kind of townhome sort of thing. So I know exactly how much distance there is between the kitchen counter and uh, the bottom part of the banister rail for the stairs.
And I know you
Um,
don't drive, but this must help a lot when it comes to the cycling as well.
it does, yeah. There's always, I always know where certain things are, certain things to avoid when it comes to, bumps in the road or the cycling surface. It makes life a lot easier. Um, as far as just navigating in general. Same thing at work, for the most part, there's a lot of things that I know where they are, so I don't have to worry about watching too closely, where I'm going. Like obviously, with people milling around at work, you always want to be careful and conscious of those other people around you. But for the most part, like, yeah, I could pretty well get around day or night without needing um,
To
vision.
see everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
to
Which
get
is
back
a
to your, oh, sorry, go ahead.
nice. It's a nice benefit. If I'm being honest, to
Makes
be
things a
able to
lot
do that.
easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to get back to your career here for a second because
Sure.
it does really interest me. You have a really interesting career. I'm kind of curious how you kind of transitioned into the audio engineering and into that industry.
Sure. So I kind of caught a little bit of a taste of this when I was, in my early years of high school. I was part of a choir, and every Saturday we would meet to rehearse. And one of the things that we would do is we would make sure that the piano was mic'd up because um, the choir was too loud to actually for the piano to be able to keep up. Essentially, there wasn't enough sound coming out of the piano um, to uh, allow us, the singers, to actually hear it
Okay.
without needing some amplification. So there was me and another guy in the choir. We were about the same age. And we would every Saturday, we'd make sure that the sound system that we used to amplify the piano and the director's voice was set up so that everything would work. Um, and so that kind of got me started on the path. But it wasn't really until I got to college that I got really interested in it. And this is going back to the beginning when the doctors told me I'd never go to college. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. I did go to college. I graduated actually, and because I was able to go to college, I was able to find my career. I was in college studying philosophy because I thought I was on a completely different path at the time. But I became very, very involved with the audiovisual department while I was in school as a student worker. And we were responsible for putting up and taking down all of the equipment that was used for things like um, the musicals and the drama club productions that were put on, the concerts that we put on outdoors, all kinds of other stuff. So I got pretty well acquainted with stage and audio equipment, lighting equipment, all kinds of stuff. And I got to a point where I wanted to start learning how to do sound because I had been asked to run the sound for the musical that was being put on one semester. We did Pirates of Penzance by, I think it's Rogers and Hammerstein. And I'm sure anyone who's a theater kid will correct me if I'm mistaken there. Um,
I know for a fact I have a couple listeners who are into theater, so maybe we'll get an answer.
we very well may. Um, and I had, at that point in time, I was a sophomore in college, and this was my first time ever doing sound, was for this musical. And I really had no idea what I was doing. I was just muddling my way through. Like, I understood some of the basic concepts of making things sound balanced, but when it came to things like equalization, tuning voices based on the microphone, the voice, the room, and the speakers that were being used in the room, I understood none of that. That was all completely foreign concept to me. And I don't even want to talk about compression yet, because that's a whole nother can of worms. That even still, like, I have trouble understanding how that works. And we're talking, 8-9 years down the road from where I got started. So take that for what you will. But that was the thing, was I wanted, I had, it was something that interested me, something that I wanted to learn how to do. And so as time went on, I started to do more and more live sound stuff, whether it was just spoken word, talks given by professors here at the university, to different members of the student body for different things, to helping out with getting the sound systems, the speakers and stuff set up for school dances and things like that. Like, that was kind of where I got started, but live sound was always where my heart was. And so at a certain point, I think it was my junior year of college, we had started to invest in some new audio equipment. We had started getting new speakers, subwoofers, and a mixer, because we had been renting all of this stuff so much that we decided it was time to invest in it, to own it for ourselves. So I got lucky. At that point in time, there was a guy who was going around the country giving classes on how to use some of this equipment. I can't remember if they might have been free classes, which, if that was the case, that was an incredible gift right there. So I got a couple of buddies who I was working with at the time to go with me, because like you mentioned before, I don't drive. So without these two friends, we would not have been able to go to this class.
Right.
And it was essentially just a one-day thing of, here's the equipment, here's how it works, here's how to use it, this is what to do. And it was eye-opening, like just looking at all of these things, and like, oh, whoa, this is how an equalizer works, this is what a compressor does, this is, like,
That's exciting, man. It's
it
exciting
was
when that
great.
happens. Yeah.
And so that really started me on the path. And then I discovered a YouTube video, and I forget what it's called, but it was this guy, same guy, walking through how he builds a mix for a full band, full drum kit, bass guitar, keys, acoustic guitar, electric guitars, vocals, all of that stuff. He's building all of that, and he's showing you, while looking, down over top of the exact same mixing console that we have here, the one that I'm totally familiar with. He's showing you how to use it. And those kinds of resources, they're not, it's not like they don't exist, period. They do exist. They are out there. You just have to, sometimes you have to dig for them a little bit to find them.
The internet's a very deep place.
It is. And fortunately, some of these things, were a little bit easier to find. And that was a huge benefit to learning how to mix sound.
Man, so you went from philosophy to audio engineering.
Well, so here's part of the crazy part of the story. So I stuck with the philosophy degree because we don't have an audio engineering degree here at the school where I work and where I graduated. So my career is based solely on my experience and
Oh.
what I've done, what I've taught myself.
I did not know that. I thought that you got a degree in audio
No,
engineering.
no,
Huh.
my degree
So you have a philosophy degree.
is in philosophy. Yeah, which
Sick.
um, in some ways it does help with some of the things that I do from a career perspective, from a work perspective, because you have to really think about certain things very differently than you might, or think very logically. And a lot of what work, a lot of audio engineering work is a lot of just logical linear thinking. Because if you think about signal flow, you've got your microphone in front of you that plugs into an interface in your computer that routes that sound into whatever it is that you want it to go into, whether that's a video call or um, whatever. And it's kind of the same thing. Each sort, stop along the way, you can trace it by a line. Um, and so it's great for trying to think linearly and think logically. But it's also really good when you have to step outside of the box and think, okay, the way that I always do this, the way that I always, approach this particular situation isn't going to work this time. So what do I have to do differently in order to achieve the same end result, which ultimately is a stellar production that everyone walks away from just absolutely awestruck. Like, wow, that was fantastic. I can't believe that they did this or that or the other thing with this production.
Ideally, funny enough, like I feel like ideally, you've done a great job with the mixing when nobody says anything about it.
That is 100% correct. Um, More often than not, I'll walk away from an event, or I'll be working afterwards, getting everything kind of cleaned up. Not a word from anyone. No one says a word about how great it sounded. They'll say, oh, did you like, they played this song or that song, or wow, that was, really cool how this one group,
You give yourself like a mini tap on the back when you hear people talking about how good the performers were, because like that's your
yeah,
job,
because
man.
exactly. And so I'm like, okay, good. People enjoyed it. Like that's what I want to hear. Like I don't necessarily need to hear, from people directly, like, man, you did a really great job mixing their sound. Like that was really awesome. I don't need to hear that necessarily. Like don't get me wrong.
That's
It
nice.
is really nice to hear that from people. I love hearing it because, uh, it's reassuring. It lets me know like, hey, I'm doing a good job here. But if I'm hearing people walk away from it, like, talking about how great of a performance it was, that definitely tells me, okay, you did good, kid.
You ever been
So,
heckled?
yes, I have.
Let's talk about it.
You know, not enjoyable. I get people usually, sometimes it's people, shout my name, uh, you know, because something goes wrong. It's like, you know what? I'm a human being. Yes, I do a really good job 90% of the time, but the other 10%, there's going to be a problem. And you know what? I'm going to do the best I can to fix it. Um,
So it's usually like a crewmate or somebody that you know
no,
personally.
it's crowd. It's crowd.
How does the crowd know your name? Are they
Because
students?
yeah, they're all students.
Okay.
They all know who I am. I mean,
That's. I feel like that's even more pressure, man.
it can be,
They
it
all know
can
who
be.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because I'm involved in so much that it's gotten to a point where I'll not actually be working at an event of for whatever reason. And I'll have students who work for me who are there in my place, and they'll get called upon to render assistance, but the person who's asking for assistance is calling for me by name.
Oh, awkward.
Which does that gets a little awkward. It's like, I'm actually not there. That's my student workers. So, you know, that's there's some interesting things, with how my relationship with the campus community, with regards to my job, is structured. And it does make for somewhat challenging situations when things don't necessarily go according to plan.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic. Well, you
Yeah,
graduated from there, so people know you personally, but you
exactly.
also have a job to do, and you work there professionally now. So
Yeah.
you've got
And
you
I
have
still
like
have
the human
friends
John
among the student
Paul.
body,
Yeah,
because there's people that I interact with on a regular basis, um, that you know because I interact with them so much or so often, we kind of become friends through that professional interaction, to where I get to see them in a non-professional capacity, and it's there's a little bit of there's a different sense to how that interaction goes, with some of those people. There's a little bit more comfort and, um, just overall, like, hey, I can let my guard down a little bit on
mm.
my side and on their side. But sometimes it's difficult too, because you have to be like, okay, I have to. I'm speaking in my professional capacity here. Like this is this is the situation essentially, and whatever it is, sometimes you have to be like, okay, I have to set aside the fact that, we are friends, and I
It's
have to
kind of like when
speak
a
to you.
teacher is cool or a professor is cool. They have a job to do, but you also
Yeah,
just want to talk to them.
exactly.
Yeah,
And there were some professors I had who were kind of like that, um and some staff members that I had who were very much like that. My boss when I was in college was absolutely that way. Like, we uh, some of my fellow student workers and I, when we were in school, we'd go over to his house every so often to, smoke cigars and play cards. And it was great. We loved it.
you play poker
um
at all?
yeah, yeah, we
Nice.
play poker
You
and
any
have
good?
cigars, and uh I have my runs of good luck here and there,
Mm.
but it's very rare. I'll occasionally I'll have a really nice, you know evening where I'm getting good hands a lot of the time and I'm playing them well.
When you're
And I
smoking
get,
a cigar, do you feel like you're better than you actually are? I feel like I would.
yeah, yeah, I do.
That's
Which
funny.
I've actually, I've never noticed whether or not my nystagmus gets better or worse depending on, whether I'm
The
having a cigar
cigar.
or not.
I've smoked my fair share of cigars. I don't think that it really affects me so much.
I don't think it does either. I think if I'm having a drink, it does a little bit. It affects me a little bit more.
The alcohol
Um,
will make my eyes go crazier, but I won't notice it because I'm drunk.
I've had so I've had a similar experience. First drink or two, my eyes actually slow down where I can see better. Interestingly enough, and
Interesting.
I'm, uh, you know, that's something I've noticed. I gotta, there's a kind of a point basically on the whole the, the whole trajectory, essentially, if you want to look at it that way, where I'll hit this, like, I don't know what you want to
You
call
get
it.
a happy spot. You're
Yeah,
buzzed.
exact. I guess where I'm just, everything is like, I notice that things are a little bit clearer. It's a little bit easier to focus, things like that. Um, and then I'll, the next, I'll drink, a little bit more, and then it's gone, and then I can't see at all. And
I
I
can
that
relate to that, man.
I actually do know that I can't see, because like my eyes start to, like, I get like a little bit, paranoid, I guess, trying to, see what I'm missing, because I know
Uh,
I'm not seeing stuff. And
Weed
it's
does that to me. Weed's definitely done that to me. I don't know about alcohol. With alcohol, I just don't care if I can't see. I'm having a good time. mean, that's if I'm drunk. I really don't. I used to get drunk, a fair share back when I was like a freshman in
Sure.
college or high school, but it's really slowed down a lot. You're right about that happy spot though, like right before you're drunk, but you're buzzed, where
Yeah,
things are
where
just a
every
little more calm and
exactly.
you feel your senses a little bit more and
Yep.
your eyes just are a little bit more calm. I could definitely relate to that.
Yeah. So that's, something I've noticed in since I've, kind of been paying attention to things like that. But
And
I
oh,
I
sorry, go
don't
ahead.
I don't I don't usually, I'm not like going out there to try to hit that spot, all the time. Like I'll sit down and have a singular beer, at the end of the day, and that's it, and I don't need it every day.
You like whiskey at
Um,
all?
I do, yeah. I'm a,
Nice.
I'm a
What do you
big bourbon
drink?
guy.
Okay.
I I'm a big fan of 1792.
I just had
That's
one.
a
I just had one. I mean, it's gone now, but
yeah,
it lasted
solid
a
bottle
minute.
of bourbon. It
Yeah.
always rely on it for being good.
By the way, for anybody
Um,
listening, I said I just had one. That doesn't mean I just drank some now. I'm completely sober. I mean, I had a bottle of it and it lasted like a couple months, but the bottle is gone now. That's what I meant. I am not drunk right now.
that's a good
I,
clarification
I
there.
figured I should clarify that just in case.
Yeah, I just don't want anyone being like,
His
dude,
eyes are
what the
shaking. Is he drunk?
hell? um, but
John
I've
Paul, I
got
am a little curious though. Earlier you mentioned, I know I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but I am really curious about this. I want to know more about it.
sure.
You said there was a correlation between some philosophy and in your career with the audio engineering, and you went a little bit into um, how it helps you problem solve and how it makes you look at things more logically. But I'm curious if there's anything else that you've learned from philosophy that you're able to transfer to that, or even like in anything else in life. Like, what are your biggest takeaways from the philosophy that you've learned?
Um, as well, to answer, as far as career wise, it was primarily the problem solving and just kind of being logical. That's largely where um, that learning resides.
Okay.
Is or as far as being career oriented. From a personal perspective, I can speak a lot more um, to or speak to a lot deeper influence. One of the last classes that I took for my major in college was a class called the Philosophy of Love, and it dives into the study of um, how human not the psychology necessarily, because there is a lot of psychology involved in this particular class, but it dove into some of the philosophical um, aspects of what it means to be a human being, what it means to love, because all human beings are wired to give and receive love from each other. And then some of the things that arise from not giving or receiving well the love of others, essentially. So one of the things that and what happens as a result of um, that imperfectly given love, that imperfectly received love. And you see this most often in childhood. If you look back at some of the things that you experience as a child, and you look at this is something that happened to me as a child. How does that, you know something bad, for example, like your parents do the best that they can to you know love you into existence. That is their job, as this class um, uh, posits, as the understanding goes. So your parents quite literally, by loving you, give you your existence. Um, but human beings aren't perfect. And so they sometimes make mistakes. And so you'll have situations where, maybe for who you are, the way that your parents love you isn't necessarily the way that you're receiving that love. Or they're just incapable of loving you the way that you need to be loved in a specific way, essentially, because it takes different forms. And that can lead to some pretty devastating psychological and emotional wounds that you have to deal with later on in life. I mean, it's, it's a very vulnerable subject. One of the things that I noticed, taking away from that class was a lot more knowledge of myself. I was able to introspect a lot better because I understood a lot more of why I am the way that I am, what things exist in my life, what wounds exist because of ways that I wasn't loved well as a kid, or ways that I didn't receive love properly. One of the books that we read in that class was a fascinating look into the study of childhood play. It's called Dibs in Search of Self, and I think Dibs is kind of a nom de plume for the child in question. But basically, he is incapable when he comes to the child psychologist of play, which is an incredibly important part of childhood, is learning how to play, make believe, whatever.
Play with others. Yeah, it's huge in developing
or even
social skills, and
just to have the ability to imagine playtime on your own. If you're just the only kid in the house for whatever reason, and you have to know how to entertain yourself through play. And this child in the book didn't know how to do that, and it was only through multiple therapy sessions that he learned how to play and to express himself through play and in a way that was constructive.
Now, how does that happen through a therapy session?
Well, they basically, and it's been a few years since I read the book, so I beg forgiveness for any inaccuracies that I may
how dare you
relate
not remember
here.
Everything.
But for all intents and purposes, they basically put the kid alone in a room full of toys, and that was just essentially, and I think he may have had an attendant there who was like kind of keeping an eye on him, making sure that he was okay, but not really interacting with him otherwise, unless he initiated the interaction. The idea was for him to lead
take the initiative
and lead the play session, essentially. And so it was something that play is really not something you can teach to a child. You can't really teach them, they just kind of learn how to do it instinctually,
naturally, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's something,
so you put them into an environment where hopefully it would come out naturally,
encouraged. Exactly. And so that's kind of what happened, but it took a lot of time.
Interesting.
And they had to, in some ways explain to him why certain ways of play aren't necessarily appropriate. Like, it's not necessarily appropriate to just destroy things without reason. Like, you could build, a house out of, blocks, and then knock it over because, Godzilla or King Kong is coming through, and knocking over this town that you've built up with your blocks. But just to, break,
just do it for no reason,
toys for no reason whatsoever, that's really not an appropriate way to play.
So is that something that they tell the kid, or is that also something else that they try to influence naturally for the kid to know?
If I recall correctly, it was something that they wanted to try to influence naturally within him, like through through the environment rather than outright telling him what was wrong. Because that's another thing.
God, I am curious how they could do that.
If you tell a child that something, that they shouldn't do something, or that something is wrong or whatever, it can really kill your self-confidence.
Yeah.
Which is something that's really important to develop in children, because if you don't, they're not going to have the spirit to go out and do something. Like, I'm sure in your case, like this, starting this podcast was really a daunting task, I would imagine, because it's a lot of work to get something like this off the ground.
I didn't tell anybody about it. There wasn't a single person in my personal life who knew about this until I had, I think, at least 3 episodes out, because I didn't want anything, not like anybody was going to influence me not to do it, but I just didn't want to put it out there. I wanted to keep it between myself and the community, and then, get a couple episodes done and start talking about it. But yeah, I could definitely see how you don't want to discourage the child from doing something like that. But that still leaves me with the question, how do you influence a child naturally to not do things that are morally wrong, or not morally, but like, destroying something?
Yeah.
Especially
Which
if the
kind
kid
of does play into moral right and wrong in a way.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, it's them acting out something that's, they're kind of imagining, but it could be based on something that they saw somewhere else.
So maybe, since the child's never really played before and you put him in that environment, so you would think instinctively that it's important. You think instinctively that a child knows how to play if you put him in a playing environment. So you would kind of just also assume that it's nature to not destroy things as well, and that would come along with it.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes that might be something that may have been an instance where they stepped in and took a more active role in explaining, like, okay, you can't, or this is something that you shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I apologize. It's been, like I said, it's been about 5 years since I read the book. I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details now. But the salient points, about how parenting influences a child's growth into adulthood are the points that really stuck with me. And there was parts of that story where you saw interaction between the person who was working with the child and the child's parents. And you could see there were some differences in how mom approached her relationship versus how dad approached his relationship with the child. Dad at the time, he seemed a lot more hands off, and mom was very hands on. Mother hen sort of characterization, if you will. Which is, there are good and bad things to both of those approaches, but it's largely what led to the fact that the child was, essentially incapable of play, and incapable of really communicating what it was that he was what he was experiencing.
Gotcha.
Whether that was through play or through words.
I could talk about this all day, man. But
I could too, honestly. I mean, it's an incredibly fascinating subject, and it kind of ties in to the idea of parenting that we had.
I was just gonna transition it right into you. I was like, well, now that we're on the topic of how parents can influence the direction their child's life. Now, I'm
Exactly.
sure your parents have had a huge role in that, especially bringing you to the first doctor and them telling you that you can't read, you can't go to college, and here you are, you obviously read, you're working at the college that you graduated from. Now, what role do your parents play in that?
A pretty important one, honestly. I mean, so
Because they could have just stopped at the first doctor.
They could have, and that was something that I don't really understand. I don't know, because I never really discussed this with them, in depth. But my, I guess the way that I see it is that they didn't like the answer that they, or the the response that they got from the first doctor. They
Hmm.
decided they wanted to get a second opinion. And I mean, medically speaking, that's entirely within a patient's right is to get another opinion on whatever diagnosis it is that they receive, especially when it's something as potentially life changing as a vision impairment that could, in theory, according to this one doctor, leave me with essentially a life of nothing. Um, and so they're
By the way, I want you to know before you continue
yeah.
that you are not the first guest to tell me that a doctor has told them this. I had a previous guest, Talene, and it wasn't her, I don't believe, but it was her cousin, and her cousin also has nystagmus, and
Okay.
the cousin's doctor told them like you can't do anything. Pretty much the same things that your doctor told you. You can't read. You're not going to school. But unfortunately, the parents kind of went with it. The parents didn't really go so deep into finding a different opinion. So that'll hinder you, man. That'll
it
really discourage a child.
it really will. I mean,
Yeah.
that's right. I mean, we're talking when I was an infant, a baby, a toddler. This is when this kind of all got started. I mean, my parents were dead set, like, we are going to do everything we can to make sure that our son has a good life, because that is our responsibility to him as his parents, is to make sure that he is set up for success in whatever it is that he does, however that he achieves that.
That's awesome.
And so that was something that they followed through on throughout my childhood, was always doing things that they felt were in my best interests. I went to I went to parochial school for kindergarten and first grade. And after that, my parents decided to pull me and my other brother, who was a year behind me in school, um, out of that program, out of that system, and homeschool us, because they felt that it would be um, a schooling experience, an educational experience that would be much better suited to each of us as individuals than the parochial school would be able to provide, because they're catering to the number of people in the class, not
Yep.
to each individual student. It's kind of a lowest common denominator sort of thing.
Right.
And so my parents are very much like, we're not comfortable with that approach, because we understand our sons have specific needs as students, as people, and we feel that we are best equipped to provide for those needs. So like, I need extra time to complete assignments, because while I can read, sometimes it takes me a longer time to get through a reading assignment, because I get tired and my eyes start to go, a little loopy, and I can't focus on the words,
Yep.
or I'll get lost on the page. That happens too. Um,
So did he graduate high school from homeschool?
I did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the
Um,
transition there within itself.
but the thing with that was, I had an accredited program that I was a part of. So I was enrolled in a homeschooling or a distance learning program that we completed from home. So homeschooling, yes, but also have, an actual high school diploma
Sure.
from an accredited institution. Um, so there's a lot of things there, like a lot of misunderstandings about homeschooling that don't exist, or that aren't an issue.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I mean, that's great to hear. Um, how your parents have helped you so much in becoming who you are, and you always love to hear that stuff.
yeah,
And
I mean,
that's
all along the way, they've been very encouraging, as far as making my own decisions for my life, figuring out what it is that I wanted to do with my life, and giving me the space to follow some of the things that I really do some of the things that I really enjoy doing. And I'm
So
very
if you're a parent
grateful.
and you're listening to this, don't be discouraged. Not saying that you are already, but I've definitely seen a few discouraged parents or concerned parents, I should say. And I think
Yeah.
this is a very good example. And another thing that you do that I think would surprise a lot of people here. is you're into carpentry.
I am, yes. So one of the things, and this ties in a little bit with my job, is I advise our campus's drama club, and one of the things that I do as their advisor, is I help build their set pieces. Um, and so this week, actually, I've been working on building set pieces for our upcoming musical, which we open next week. No time like the present, right? Um, and I guess it's probably a little bit strange to see the guy who's got the visual impairments, working with power tools, with a
It's an
um,
interesting one, man. I
a
haven't heard
circuit.
this before.
I'm last couple of days I've been working with a circular saw, with a miter saw, um, a power sander, drills, impact drivers, all kinds of stuff. A hammer and nails today for something else that we're working on. Just tools that you never really would think that someone would handle, but I here I am working away with them, and I've
I think
got
this kind of
all my fingers and no scars.
I really think this kind of falls into place with what we were discussing earlier about how if things are staying consistent, it's easier to maneuver, it's easier to know what you're doing, and you don't really have to see as much as you might think.
Yeah.
And obviously you do need to see. I mean, you can't I don't think you can
W-
do this if you're completely blind, but
No, carpentry is definitely one of those things, and perhaps we could be mistaken. There could be a blind carpenter out there who you know does his work without needing to see.
there's gotta be. There's always
I'm
that one
sure
dude.
someone like that exists, and
There's
if
a
there
carpenter
is,
out there with no hands too.
I would love to meet him so I can ask him. How is it that you do what you do? Um, I mean, I know for a fact, like I have, problems at, from time to time, making sure that things are lined up correctly. Like, I'm absolutely, double, triple, quadruple checking, making sure that when I'm going in to drill a hole, I'm drilling in the correct spot so that when I drill through to set my frame in place, I'm not completely, coming in at an angle or, completely off to where I'm underneath or over top of whatever board it is that I'm trying to join with my frame. Um, yeah, definitely takes me a little bit more time to get through stuff like this, than perhaps someone who's got more experience, or doesn't have the visual issues that I have. Um, but just
As you get more
because
experience, that'll quicken.
it should, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but just because I have nystagmus, just because I'm nearsighted, doesn't mean that I am going to sit back and let someone else do the carpentry. Like I'm comfortable enough doing it and you know handling these tools to where I don't have an issue. And I'm sure if people were to look at the situation and be like, that's actually kind of impressive that you're doing this. I'm like, well, yeah, it is, but I also just enjoy it
Yeah.
straight up. Like um it's therapeutic for me. Like I mentioned I have had hammer and nails today. I mean, there's nothing like going and just smacking a nail with a hammer. Um, there's something about just that action is so relaxing. It's cathartic.
There is
Um,
something about it.
if you're
I
dealing with,
agree.
you've got some sort of problem and you want to, you're kind of frustrated or whatever, grab a hammer and some nails, go find a piece of wood that, you own that you can actually hammer nails into, um, and drive a few nails, work out your aggression through something constructive, or, you know, work on a problem in your head while you're doing something constructive or something, or just let the work take the place of whatever it is that you're dealing with because you're just getting agitated thinking about it and you really don't need that agitation in order to solve the problem. usually one of the things I found is, by getting into this kind of creative state, working with lumber, and making it look, like it needs to for the sets, I'll hit this flow of just, I'm going and I'm making progress, and it's just, everything is just working for me, and it's great. I love it. And I lost my train of thought. I am so sorry.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. I think the way that you look at hammering and doing the carpentry, it would be a similar way to how I look at going to the gym or
Sure.
even doing cardio for an
Absolutely.
extended period of time.
Absolutely. And I'll do that. We talked, earlier, I ride a bicycle. And there are times where I am just in a particular headspace where I need to get out of the house or whatever. And I go and I ride, 10, 15 miles.
I think what it really is just being in the action of being completely focused on one thing.
It takes your head out of whatever, gets your head out of whatever problem it is that, you're stewing in, and puts you into something else entirely.
It puts you into a meditative state.
Exactly.
Essentially what that is.
When you get out of that, when you're done, and then you come back to the problem, chances are there'll be a solution sitting right in front of you that you had no idea was even there, because you were so focused on the problem that you couldn't see the solution.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to take a couple of steps back.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Do something else.
Whether that's, through hitting the gym, or getting out and, riding a bicycle, or going for a run or a swim, or doing something creative, whether it's painting or, picking up a guitar, or, sitting down at the piano, or whatever it is. Do that. Get out of your own head for an hour, and then come back to whatever it is that you're struggling with. Chances are the solution will present itself pretty quickly.
I think that's a really good place to end this on, just like a really positive note there. And
sure.
Man, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to me. This has been definitely a favorite of mine. Very informative. It was definitely very nice talking to you.
Hey, I'm glad I was able to come on. I'm glad I discovered your podcast. And like I said, I hope that some of the things that I'm, relaying here, give, parents of children with nystagmus a cause for hope. People out
I can't imagine that it won't.
And I hope people out there like us also, look at, have a chance to see this at some point and say, oh, wow, maybe life isn't so bad. Like, yeah, sure. I don't drive. I have a great community around me that helps me out when I need to get places. So,
even if your only takeaway from this episode is that Master of Puppets is about drug addiction, that's still good to me. I'm still happy with that. So, hey man, I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. I'm, happy to have been a part of this.
All right. I want to thank everybody for listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give the video a like, give the video a comment. Let me know what you think. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, thank you for listening.